Hi, my name is Jared Shorrock, and this is my major project artifact video for my game, Time Force. Time Force is a game in which teams of 3 are tasked with the protection of our timeline. They travel to different points in the timeline to deal with the threats at hand, and their next mission is zombie cowboys. The player's goal is to go to these locations and last as long as they can throughout the rounds and waves that they are going to have to deal with. My personal goal, however, was to take my literature review, in which I talked about simple mechanics creating compelling gameplay, and create a game in which uses these simple mechanics to do just that. I am going to be taking you through the creation of my game to show you how I use these simple mechanics well to create this compelling gameplay, and use tests in order to back it up. The fabric brief that was given to me stated that the game would have to be multiplayer. With my initial idea of a top-down perspective, I felt I could use this camera angle to emphasise the use of this. A camera change idea was created and eventually implemented. The idea was that while players move room to room, the camera changes to that room's top-down viewpoint. This ultimately splits the players apart, as they can't but need to see the whole map, requiring good communication between them too. This is made more clear with a different heights idea for the level, which was also implemented, making communication between teammates that much more important. Off the back of this idea, a Trello was created to keep track of what I was doing during what weeks, which in turn created a minimal viable product for the game. The plan was to have an MVP complete by 3 weeks. By week 2, I had completed everything I set out to do, with a model for the player character working and zombies being implemented with a model for them too. A shooter mechanic using a simple projectile movement was made, and a death mechanic both for the zombies and player, using box collisions on the player, zombies and bullets collectively, creating a straightforward top-down shooter. The zombies would also die instantly after being shot, while the player had 10 hits until they died. The UI was also updated using different character models that would be seen in-game. The idea for a wave/round mechanic was thought about, however was not a necessity for the MVP, so it was moved past the 3-week period to be dealt with at a later time. The main focus for this week was the gameplay between zombies and the player, ensuring it was fun but challenging. After a talk with my tutor, we came to the conclusion that the zombies moved way too quickly, which you can clearly see in the video, so a change was made in accordance to this. By week 3, the Trello had been updated to ensure the MVP would be done by the end of the week. With the feedback I received from my tutor, a change was made not only to the zombie movement speed, but also the players, accommodating to a much slower pace for the game. Altering the movement speeds also meant changing the number of zombies within the level, trying to find the right amount of difficulty for the game. Finding the balance was tricky, but getting it done before the MVP was complete was of the utmost importance. After eventually finding a fair amount of difficulty, a range for the bullets was created as a test to see if it would work in this environment. The range worked well with the close quarter combat that was already in place, primarily now being used to stop the bullets going through the walls when it was misfired. With the MVP completed, more focus was pushed towards the level design of the game. Replacing all the white box with actual assets was the next step towards getting the game complete. Using what I knew about the game already through the MVP, I was able to create gameplay elements that weren't initially thought of. The main element was the player's ability to loop around assets quickly to get away from the zombies. With most of the assets being circular tables and barrels, it became quite easy to spot where these loops were. The barrel room definitely required it, due to its original open area being the main place for being surrounded. Another gameplay element I focused on within the level design was the narrative of the world. Placing a delivery section for the saloon and personal belongings on the owner's table showed the place was in use before the zombies took over, making it feel empty yet whole. This narrative aspect was something I looked into more and more as progress on the game was being made. Moving into week 4, with the initial interior level design being completed, it was time to implement the wave/round mechanic previously mentioned. To start, I needed to create spawn points for the zombies, so utilising the multiplayer aspect of the game, I spread each spawn point out to the 4 corners of the level, one in the top left, top right, and bottom left through the saloon doors. This splits the players into different sections to focus on a specific area, just like the camera changes and height differences enforced earlier. When deciphering how many zombies should spawn, I looked back to what I had done previously when I altered the movement speeds in week 3. Finding the balance between the speed and the number of zombies earlier in the process meant no time was wasted during this section. Also during this week, Fabric came to have a talk about my game and give me some feedback on it. The overall consensus was good, with a few improvements towards the characters as individuals and utilising the Western theme through gameplay, something I added into the next few weeks of the Trello. One of these improvements was already being worked on though, with the UI already having been updated to accommodate the characters as individuals. Coming into week 5 and reviewing the work I had done, I realised creating a secondary level similar to the Western Saloon, but set in a different time period, was essentially impossible. This was taking into consideration how long it had taken me to make the still incomplete saloon level. While also thinking about a main menu at the same time, a combination of a new level and menu was thought of and was eventually executed. A simple layout with 4 rooms, each corresponding to a different sub-menu, like character select and settings, was the main concept. Creating this hub world allowed me to be able to show the other characters, rather than just having them as UI. This solid foundation would mean more focus could be put onto the saloon and its gameplay, rather than having 2 unfinished levels. Sticking with the hub world through week 6, the player animation was changed to a simple run, and the UI was removed since neither was needed within that level. The next step for both levels was lighting, so whilst I was working on the layout, lighting was slowly being implemented and tested to see what would work. The main use for the hub world was the ability to teleport to the mission at hand, which is why when the layout and initial lighting was complete, a simple enter box collision to load level was created. An idea I was playing around with at the time was a loading screen similar to what you would find in Black Ops 2's transit map, in which the loading screen is more of an introduction to the level. At the end of week 6 leading into week 7, the hub world had reached its own kinda MVP, meaning work towards the western level was back on track. Like stated earlier, the next step for the level was lighting, which was exactly the first thing I started working on. Using the assets to their advantages, a warm orange light was used in contrast to the white lights used in the hub world. The lighting was created to be more realistic within its setting. However, the lights, I feel, create a very warm feeling towards the player, which is completely contradictory to what the game is all about. I feel the lighting, however, works in both areas. The lighting also needed to fit with the assets too, which is why I believe the orange glow allows everything to stand out. With everything up to a good level, a return to the hub world was needed to hopefully finalise it. One test that I did during production, which I will talk about later, mentioned how the controls felt. The consensus was that they were good. However, they didn't know the controls until I told them. Thus, when the game begins, the first thing you see in the hub world are the controls to the game, and a credit for my work. Some alterations were made to the world, making it feel like more of a menu using signs above each door, similar to buttons that you would find in a main menu. With a working multiplayer to the game looking less and less likely, the character select room was no longer needed. However, it was changed to feature more narrative aspects to the game, with bios and descriptions for each character. With the game looking to soon be completed in week 8, the delete active death mechanic used for the zombies at the start of production was no longer going to suffice. An idea for a ragdoll mechanic was brought up in the Fabric meeting a few weeks prior, but was constantly pushed back throughout the Trello due to it not being the most important thing at the time. So finally, an attempt on that was made. The ragdoll mechanic worked, but looked absolutely ridiculous with zombies flying across the room. However, slowly it began to fit with the game, and overall made it a lot more fun. So I decided to leave it as is. Using the exact same ragdoll mechanic, a plan was set out to create traps to either kill or block enemies from entering, and eventually it was implemented. This gave players a different way to play the game rather than just running and shooting. Finally, the last thing to do to complete the game was sound design. Using shotgun sounds to help the players know when they need to reload and when they are reloading helped out a lot due to the limitations of my animation skills. This was done due to another test I did, in which players couldn't tell when they needed to reload or had already reloaded. So, sounds were the way to go. I think overall, they fit well with the environment. A background song that you've been hearing throughout the video was also used, sticking with the calm and warm aesthetic of the game, whilst also being quite focused and thought out. Now, I'm going to be showing what the final game looks like, and playing through the game how I normally would. Whilst this happens, I will give a few of my opinions on the game itself, such as gameplay and how I overall feel about it. Then later go back into more detail about the test that I did, and my overall opinions about the experience as a whole. With the game finally completed, a few little design choices throughout the level were made, with bottles on shelves, hats on tables, and more belongings on the owner's table, adding to some of the narrative design elements of the game. The overall level design, using loops for the player to run around to get away from the zombies, makes the game feel more open, especially in the outside areas of the map. Giving access to each room through different places also allows for this loop to occur, while also being a good use for multiplayer communication to let someone know how many zombies are coming. The over-the-top zombie deaths really add to the game too, creating a unique selling point for the game, which initially was never the intention. Like stated before, due to my lack of animation skills, another plan for the game was to implement an idle animation for the player. Unfortunately, this wasn't completed, but I feel it doesn't take too much away from the game, but would have been a nice solid addition nonetheless. Another thing that wasn't implemented was a pause menu, which is something I'm going to work on post-module and will hopefully be able to upload it to itch.io. Obviously, the most important thing I missed was actually having a working multiplayer mechanic within the game. I don't know if this is something I will look into for the itch.io version of my game, but this is definitely something I want to look into for long-term sake. During the production of the game, 2 tests were conducted, with both being very valuable to different sections of the module. The first test was conducted during week 7, with the test being used to check core gameplay elements and see if they worked. It was done in week 7 due to it being pushed back from week 3/4. This was all down to me and my poor decisions during production, as I would focus on work at hand rather than the test. Eventually though, I got the test done, and the results were great. The questions were very specific to my game, so the answers, in turn, were also extremely specific. Questions like how the camera changes looked and felt, and were the controls easy to manage, gave me incredible responses to use in the final weeks of the game's creation. The other test was looking towards my literature review. I did at the start of the module. Testing how long players played the game for and how many rounds they completed in that time. The big question, however, was how many times they played the game for. With mine and the game's goal being replayability and compellingness, the results were exactly what I wanted. Using research and my own ability to find quicker and simpler ways to create the mechanics and have them function in the game not only backs up my literature review, but also shows that in the grand scheme and world of games design, complexity is not always the way to go to create fun and exciting games. I mean, independent games have been using this concept for years, which I go into much more detail within the literature review. Overall, I really enjoyed creating this game, and improving upon not only my level design skills, but also my Unreal Engine coding knowledge. Like stated before, this game is something that I'm going to continue working on, to hopefully, eventually, be able to upload to itch.io and improve upon my games design skills even further. I think I did a really good job with time management this time round, in comparison to other games I've created. Obviously, with a few improvements to be made, due to some ideas and concepts, like the pause menu, not making it into the final game. Not only do I think I accomplished what I set out to do by creating a compelling game with simple mechanics, but I also created something more than that. I feel I created a fun and exciting game that hopefully goes beyond this module. I think it's safe to say I am very, very happy with the result of my game, and consider it my best work. Now, I've been Jared Shorrock, and this has been my final major project game called Time Force.